I still remember the exact moment those cruel words left her mouth. Cook or starve. They weren't shouted in anger. No, they were whispered with a sharpness that cut deeper than any scream could. My daughter-in-law, Emily, stood in the doorway, her hands on her hips, eyes cold as stone, while I stood there holding a bowl of vegetables I'd been chopping for dinner. My hands trembled, but I said nothing. You see, I had come to live with my son and Emily after my husband passed away. I thought I'd be helping them, maybe cooking, maybe babysitting if they had children one day. I never imagined I'd become a burden, an unwanted presence in my own son's home. When I first arrived, things were warm. Emily smiled politely. My son hugged me tight, and I believed we'd be one happy family under one roof. I cooked their favorite meals, helped with the laundry, even ironed their clothes before work. But slowly, the smiles faded. Emily began making small remarks. You don't have to cook every day. Or, Mom, you should rest. At first, I thought she cared. But soon, the meaning behind her words became clearer. She wanted her kitchen back, and she wanted me out of her space. My son, Daniel, was always caught in the middle. I could see the discomfort in his eyes whenever Emily snapped at me. He'd sigh, run his hand through his hair, and change the subject. But silence, I learned, can sometimes hurt worse than words. His silence told me that he'd chosen peace with her over standing up for me. Then came that night, the night those words changed everything. I'd spent the afternoon preparing dinner, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and her favorite salad. I wanted to make peace, to remind her that I was here to love, not to compete. But when she walked in from work, she didn't even look at the table. She threw her purse on the counter, glanced at me, and said flatly, "Why are you still cooking? Did I ask you to?" I froze. I just thought. She interrupted me sharply. "No, you think too much. You're not my servant. If you want to cook, fine. But from now on, don't expect me to eat it. Cook for yourself or starve. I'm done with this." The room went silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I felt the air grow heavy, pressing on my chest. I wanted to cry, to scream, to ask her what I had done wrong, but I didn't. Instead, I looked at the food I'd made, food meant to bring a family together, and suddenly, it looked like evidence of my failure. That night, I ate alone. Daniel didn't come down for dinner. I heard them talking upstairs, voices muffled, but her tone was sharp, his low and apologetic. I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew the story. The next morning, I woke before dawn and sat by the window, watching the sun rise over their neatly trimmed lawn. My heart felt heavy, but strangely clear. I had always believed kindness was the answer to cruelty. But sometimes, silence is its own weapon. I made breakfast as usual, even though I knew she wouldn't touch it. Daniel came downstairs, adjusting his tie. "Morning, Mom," he said quietly, avoiding my eyes. "Morning," I replied softly. "Your coffee's on the table." He hesitated, glancing toward the stairs. "Emily had a rough night. Maybe just give her some space?" I smiled faintly. Of course, but inside, something inside me shifted. I had given her space, my kitchen, my comfort, my peace, and all she had done was fill it with disdain. Days turned into weeks. I stopped cooking for them, stopped waiting at the door, stopped offering help. I became invisible. I'd hear her laughing with her friends in the living room, bragging about her new designer cookware, as if to prove she didn't need my presence. And yet, life has a strange way of turning the tables when you least expect it. One rainy afternoon, Emily came home drenched, hair plastered to her face, furious. She slammed her keys on the table. "Daniel's late again, and he didn't even tell me where he is." I looked up from my knitting. "Maybe he's caught in traffic?" She snapped, "Don't make excuses for him. You always take his side." I blinked, taken aback. "I'm not taking sides, Emily. I'm just—" "Oh, please," she scoffed. "You've always seen me as the outsider. You think I stole your son from you? Well, guess what? I'm his wife, not you." Her words hit me harder than a slap. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Emily," I said softly, All I ever wanted was for you both to be happy. I never wanted to take anything away from you." She stared at me for a moment, her jaw tight, and then she walked off without another word. The front door slammed behind her. That night, Daniel came home late again. He looked tired, distracted. I didn't mention her outburst. I just made him tea. "Mom," he said quietly, "I think Emily's been under a lot of stress lately. She didn't mean what she said." I nodded, smiling gently. "Of course, dear, don't worry." But deep down, I knew something had changed forever. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was hurt, yes, but I had lived long enough to know that hurt can harden into strength if you let it. As I lay in bed that night, I thought of her words, "cook or starve." She believed she was cutting me down. She didn't realize she was planting the seed of her own downfall. Because someday, I knew she would need the same kindness she had thrown away. And when that day came, I would be ready not to punish her, but to teach her what respect truly tastes like. The silence in the house that evening was heavier than the smell of the burnt stew. Eleanor sat at the table, her fingers gently tracing the rim of the cracked plate in front of her. Across the kitchen, Melissa clanged pots into the sink with exaggerated force, muttering under her breath. Ethan was nowhere to be seen, most likely hiding in the living room, pretending he couldn't hear his wife's tantrum. Eleanor had lived through a lot in her 70 years. But this was different. This wasn't the exhaustion of raising children or the loneliness of losing her husband. This was humiliation, plain and sharp. In her own home, the one she and her late husband had built from nothing, she was being told to cook or starve. She remembered the early years when she'd worked double shifts at the diner to keep the lights on. When Ethan was young, he'd always sit on the counter, swinging his little legs while she fried eggs and hummed old country songs. "You're the best cook in the world, Mom," he used to say, mouth full of her apple pie. But now, that same son had married a woman who saw her as nothing more than a nuisance, a free babysitter, a leftover from another era. That night, Eleanor didn't cook. She didn't eat either. She just went to bed, pulling the quilt up to her chin and staring at the ceiling. The ticking clock was her only company, each second like a drop of cold water on her heart. The next morning, Melissa's voice pierced the quiet. "Eleanor, the kids need breakfast. I'm late for work." Eleanor came downstairs slowly, her knees aching but her mind sharp. She saw Melissa dressed impeccably, heels clicking, makeup flawless. The twins, Lily and James, were sitting at the table, sleepy-eyed and hungry. "What's for breakfast, Grandma?" Lily asked sweetly. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Whatever your mother makes, dear." Melissa spun around. "Excuse me. You expect me to." "You said it yourself," Eleanor interrupted gently. "Cook or starve." The words landed like a slap. Melissa's lips parted, but no sound came out. She stormed toward the door, grabbed her purse, and shouted, "You're unbelievable," before slamming it shut. The twins looked at each other, then at Eleanor. "Grandma, can we have cereal?" "Of course, sweetheart," Eleanor said, pouring the milk. Her hands were steady, but her heart was trembling. It wasn't about breakfast. It was about respect, something that had quietly vanished from her home. Over the next few weeks, tension simmered like soup left too long on the stove. Melissa barely spoke to her. Ethan stayed neutral, and the children seemed caught in the middle. Eleanor kept doing what she'd always done, cleaning, cooking when she wanted to, caring for the kids. But the warmth had gone out of her voice. One afternoon, while folding laundry, Eleanor overheard them arguing in the living room. "I can't take it anymore, Ethan," Melissa snapped. "Your mother acts like she owns the place." "She does technically," Ethan muttered. "That's the problem. She treats me like I'm some guest. We need space, our own life." Eleanor froze. Her heart sank as she realized how deeply Melissa resented her presence. Later that night, Ethan came to her room. "Mom," he said carefully, "Melissa's just under stress. You know how she gets." Eleanor nodded. "I know, son, don't worry." But inside, she was done. She'd spent years being the peacekeeper, the giver, the one who swallowed her pride. Not anymore. 2 days later, while Melissa was at work and Ethan was running errands, Eleanor sat at her old writing desk. She pulled out a folder marked Legal Documents and began sorting through papers, house deed, bank records, insurance policies. Her husband had always said, "Never let anyone make you feel like a guest in your own home." She took a deep breath and made a call to her lawyer. "Mr. Barnes? It's Eleanor Reeves. I'd like to make some changes to my estate plan." When she hung up, she felt lighter. For the first time in months, she had clarity. That evening, Melissa came home in a foul mood again. She tossed her keys on the counter and said, "You didn't take out the trash again." Eleanor looked up from her tea. "I didn't make any, dear." Melissa scoffed. "You're really something, you know that, acting like a victim while living in my kitchen?" Eleanor's eyes met hers, calm, steady, unflinching. "Your kitchen?" she said softly. "Melissa, maybe it's time you remembered whose house this really is." Melissa rolled her eyes and walked away, but something in Eleanor's tone made her uneasy. The next morning, a letter arrived in the mail, one that would soon turn Melissa's world upside down. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter like a ticking bomb. Melissa almost didn't notice it at first, rushing in from the driveway, juggling her purse, phone, and a bag of groceries. But the moment she saw her name written in neat, careful handwriting, Mrs. Melissa Reeves, she frowned. Eleanor was the only one who still wrote like that, with graceful loops and old-fashioned ink. She tore the envelope open, half expecting some grocery list or another reminder about the twins' homework. But what she found inside made her blood run cold. It was a letter from Mr. Barnes, Eleanor's attorney. The words were formal, polite, but the message was crystal clear. The ownership of the Reeves family home had been legally transferred, fully and permanently, to Eleanor. Any previous verbal understanding about shared ownership or inheritance was void. Melissa's jaw tightened. "What the hell is this?" she hissed, storming into the living room where Eleanor sat knitting by the window, sunlight spilling over her shoulders. "You had your lawyer send me a letter?" she demanded. Eleanor didn't look up right away. She finished a stitch, set the needles down gently, and said, "I thought you should know where things stand." "Where things stand?" Melissa's voice rose. "You're telling me this house, our home, belongs to you? After everything I've done here? The cleaning, the bills, the kids?" Eleanor met her gaze. "You didn't clean, Melissa. You complained. You didn't pay the bills. Ethan did. And as for the kids, they're your responsibility, not mine." Melissa's mouth fell open. "You can't just—" "I can," Eleanor interrupted, her tone calm but firm. "And I did." There was a pause so long it seemed to stretch the air tight. Melissa's face twisted in disbelief, then fury. "You're unbelievable. You think you can just control everyone because you're old and miserable?" Eleanor didn't flinch. "No, dear. I've just learned that kindness without boundaries turns into servitude. I've been too kind for too long." Melissa turned on her heel and stormed upstairs. Cabinet doors slammed. The twins peeked nervously from behind the hallway wall, whispering. Eleanor forced a soft smile for them. "It's all right, darlings. Go play in the garden." But the storm brewing in that house was far from over. That night, Ethan came home to chaos. Melissa was pacing the living room, waving the letter in his face. "Did you know about this?" "Did you?" Ethan took the paper, scanning it quickly. His shoulders slumped. "Mom, what is this?" Eleanor folded her hands. "It's just paperwork, Ethan. Your father and I built this home. I simply made sure it stays that way, until I decide otherwise." Melissa scoffed. "So what, you're threatening us now? Going to evict your own son?" Eleanor's voice was soft, but there was an edge in it that even Melissa couldn't miss. "I don't threaten, Melissa. I act when I'm pushed too far." Ethan rubbed his forehead, caught between his wife and his mother, both women glaring at him from opposite sides of the room. "Can we all just calm down?" he pleaded. "This isn't helping." But it was too late. The distance that had been quietly growing now stood like a wall between them. Dinner was silent. The laughter of the twins felt forced. And at night, Eleanor could hear muffled arguments from upstairs, Melissa's angry tones and Ethan's weary attempts to soothe her. One morning, as Eleanor poured herself tea, she noticed something odd. Her favorite porcelain cup, the one her late husband gave her, was cracked clean through. It sat in the sink, broken, as if it had been slammed down with deliberate force. She didn't say a word, but something inside her hardened. Later that week, Melissa threw another jab at breakfast. You know, some people your age move into retirement homes. You'd have your own space, your own friends. Eleanor looked up, smiling faintly. And leave you here to cook or starve? Oh, I couldn't possibly. Melissa's face turned red. You're doing this on purpose. Eleanor stood. Her chair scraped back softly. I'm doing what's fair. You made your choices, Melissa. Now you'll live with mine. Then she left the kitchen, calm, composed, and utterly in control. That afternoon, while Melissa was out, Eleanor made another quiet phone call. She arranged for new locks to be installed. Not immediately, not dramatically, but soon. She knew what she was doing might seem cruel, but she also knew cruelty was often the language bullies understood best. That evening, Melissa tried another attack, subtle this time. You know, Eleanor, Ethan's been talking about moving. We might sell this place soon. Find something newer. Eleanor stirred her tea. Oh, really? Then you'll need a buyer, won't you? Of course. Good? Eleanor said with a small smile. Because I won't be one. Melissa blinked. What do you... The house isn't yours to sell, dear, Eleanor said softly, rising from the table. You should probably reread that letter. And then she left the room, leaving Melissa sitting in silence, seething. Days passed. The air grew colder, not from weather but from resentment. The twins began spending more time with their grandmother, sensing her calmness was safer than their mother's temper. Ethan tried to play mediator, but it was like trying to stop a flood with his bare hands. Then came the night everything changed. Melissa came home late, later than usual. Perfume too strong, voice too sharp. Eleanor was still awake, reading in her chair. Still up? Melissa said coldly. Old habits, Eleanor replied. Melissa smirked. You like control too much to sleep, don't you? Eleanor closed her book gently. Control isn't my goal, Melissa. Peace is. But some people confuse peace for submission. Peace? Melissa laughed bitterly. You've turned this house into a war zone. Eleanor stood, her spine straight despite her years. War started when respect left, dear. You drew the first sword when you told me to cook or starve. For a moment, silence swallowed them both. Then, without a word, Eleanor walked past her, serene, unbothered, and disappeared into her room. The next morning, the locks changed. The sound of the new locks clicking into place echoed like a gavel in an empty courtroom. It was final, sharp, and symbolic. A line drawn, not in sand, but in steel. Eleanor stood by the front door, the locksmith finishing his work, his tools clinking lightly as he gathered them back into his bag. All done, ma'am, he said. These are the only 2 keys. Eleanor nodded, taking them gently. Thank you. When the door closed behind him, she held the keys in her palm for a moment, weighing them, not just in metal, but in meaning. These were more than just keys to a house. They were the keys to her peace, her boundary, her independence. That afternoon, when Melissa returned from her shopping trip, her arms full of bags and her tone dismissive as ever, she didn't even notice the small, shining difference in the door handle. She twisted the knob. It didn't move. She frowned. Tried again. Nothing. Then she knocked. Once. Twice. Harder. Eleanor opened the door a crack, her face calm as a still lake. What's this? Melissa snapped. New locks, Eleanor said simply. Excuse me? I had them changed. You've made it very clear, Melissa, that this house isn't comfortable for you anymore. So, I thought I'd make things simpler. Melissa's eyes widened. You can't just... I can, Eleanor said again, her tone unshaken. This is my home. You've made it very clear you don't want to share space with me. Now you won't have to. Melissa's voice cracked. You're kicking me out? I'm giving you exactly what you wanted. Control of your own kitchen, your own meals, your own life. Somewhere else. Behind her, Ethan appeared at the top of the stairs, his face pale. Mom, What's happening? Eleanor turned to him, her voice softening just slightly. You have a choice, Ethan. Stay here or go with her. But this constant disrespect ends today. Ethan stared between the two women, his mother, unyielding yet dignified, his wife, furious and panicked. You can't be serious, Melissa hissed. Eleanor didn't blink. I've never been more serious. Melissa's words spilled out like venom. You manipulative old witch. You think you can control everything, the house, the money, even your son's loyalty. Eleanor didn't raise her voice. I'm not controlling anyone, Melissa. I'm protecting my peace. Something you should try sometime. Ethan finally descended the stairs, rubbing his temples. Melissa, maybe you should stay with your sister for a few days. Cool off. Melissa stared at him, incredulous. You're taking her side? I'm trying to keep the family from falling apart. It already has, she shouted, tears mixing with anger. Eleanor quietly stepped aside and opened the door wider. You don't have to like me, Melissa, but you will respect me, or you'll leave. Melissa stood frozen for a moment, her chest heaving, her pride battling her fear. Then she grabbed her purse, her jaw clenched tight. You'll regret this. Perhaps, Eleanor said, but I'll regret nothing as much as letting you keep treating me like a servant. Melissa stormed out, slamming the car door so hard, the sound rattled the glass windows. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't painful. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt something like oxygen filling her lungs again. She looked at Ethan, who sat down heavily on the couch, head in his hands. Mom, he sighed. This is a mess. Eleanor placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Sometimes, Ethan, peace looks like a mess at first. He didn't answer, just nodded slightly, staring at the floor. The next few days passed in strange stillness. The twins stayed with Melissa's sister, while Ethan tried to bridge the chasm that had opened. He came home late, slept little, spoke less. And Eleanor, though she felt guilt prick at her heart, reminded herself that boundaries built on guilt crumble fast. But then, one morning, a knock came at the door again. Not Melissa this time, a courier. Package for Mrs. Eleanor Reeves, the man said. Eleanor thanked him and signed. The box was medium-sized, wrapped neatly, with no return address. She opened it carefully and froze. Inside, among layers of tissue paper, was her old porcelain teacup, the same one Melissa had broken weeks ago. But now it had been repaired, every fracture sealed with golden lacquer, shining in the morning light. A note sat beside it, handwritten in familiar cursive. They say the Japanese mend broken things with gold because they believe the cracks tell the story of survival. I may not be perfect, Eleanor, but I learned something from you. Maybe my own cracks need gold too. Thank you for showing me that peace doesn't mean surrender, Melissa. Eleanor read it twice, then a third time. For the first time in months, her hands trembled, not from anger or exhaustion, but emotion. She placed the cup on the windowsill, sunlight spilling across its golden scars. It was beautiful, not because it had been perfect once, but because it had been broken and remade stronger. That evening, she sat on the porch, cup of tea in hand, waiting. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made her heart skip. Melissa stepped out slowly, eyes wary, carrying a small bag. I came to talk, she said quietly. Eleanor nodded. Then let's talk. For a long while, neither said a word. The air between them wasn't heavy anymore, just fragile. Finally, Melissa whispered, You were right. I was cruel. I thought control was power. But you showed me it's just fear, dressed up as pride. Eleanor looked at her gently. And peace? Melissa smiled weakly. Peace is choosing not to fight battles that don't need winning. Eleanor's eyes softened. Then you've learned the hardest lesson. They sat there together until the sun dipped below the horizon. The locks stayed, but the walls inside the house began, slowly, to fall. The days that followed their conversation were gentle, like a soft rain after a long drought. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt the house breathing again, not sighing under tension, but but alive with quiet warmth. Melissa began visiting more often, not with the sharp tone or commanding air she once carried, but with humility. Sometimes she came alone, other times with the twins, their laughter filling the kitchen that had once felt like a battleground. Eleanor noticed the little things, how Melissa now brought her flowers without occasion, how she stayed to help clean up after dinner, how she asked, not demanded. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't supposed to be. Healing never was. One evening, while washing the dishes, Eleanor caught a reflection in the window. Melissa, outside, teaching the twins how to plant herbs in the small garden patch. She laughed when the soil splashed onto her clothes, her voice light and unguarded. It reminded Eleanor of herself years ago, before grief and years of struggle had hardened her. Ethan came up behind her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did it, Mom," he said softly. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Did what?" "You fixed what I thought couldn't be fixed." She turned, wiping her hands on a towel. "No, Ethan, I just stopped letting it break me. The rest, that was her choice." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I didn't realize how much I'd let things spiral. I should have protected you more." Eleanor shook her head gently. "You were trying to protect everyone. But sometimes, when you try to keep the peace for others, you lose it within yourself. I learned that too late." He hugged her, long and tight. For the first time in a long while, it felt like family again. Not perfect, not storybook, but real. That night, after everyone had gone home, Eleanor sat in her favorite chair with her journal. She'd started writing again, not out of loneliness this time, but out of clarity. She wrote about lessons, about strength, about how love can twist into obligation if left unchecked. But mostly, she wrote about forgiveness, not the kind that excuses, but the kind that frees. Her pen moved slowly. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It reshapes it into something worth remembering. The words felt right, true. The next morning, she woke to the sound of someone knocking softly on her door. It was Melissa again, holding a basket covered with a towel. "I made muffins," she said awkwardly. "Blueberry." The twins helped. Eleanor smiled. "Come in, dear." Melissa stepped inside, setting the basket on the table. For a moment, she hesitated, then pulled out a folded envelope. "There's something else. I found this while cleaning up. It's yours." Eleanor opened it carefully. Inside was a check, for a significant amount, one she recognized instantly. It was from the inheritance she had once set aside for Ethan and Melissa, the same one they had almost squandered years ago when Melissa insisted on remodeling the house against her will. "I don't want this," Melissa said quickly. "Not after everything. You should have it. Use it for yourself. Travel, rest, whatever makes you happy." Eleanor looked at her long and steady. "You're sure?" Melissa nodded. "Yes, you've already given us more than money ever could." For a moment, the silence between them carried more weight than words could. Then Eleanor folded the check and slipped it back into Melissa's hand. "No, dear. You keep it. But promise me one thing. Spend it wisely. Not on appearances, not on pride. On something that grows." Melissa's eyes shimmered. "I promise." A few weeks later, Melissa and Ethan surprised Eleanor with news. They'd found a nearby plot of land, small but rich with soil, and they wanted to turn it into a community garden for single mothers and the elderly. "It's going to be called the Golden Cup Garden," Melissa said, her smile nervous but proud. Eleanor's breath caught. "After the teacup?" Melissa nodded. "Because it reminded me that broken things can still hold beauty and purpose." Months passed, and the garden bloomed, not just with plants, but with stories. Mothers found comfort there. Elderly neighbors shared wisdom. Children laughed among the rows of lavender and mint. It became a place where life started again, quietly, without fanfare. Eleanor spent many mornings there, sitting under the shade of the oak tree, sipping tea from the same golden repaired cup. Sometimes, she'd see Melissa teaching a group of children how to plant seeds. Sometimes, Ethan would be fixing the garden fence, humming softly to himself. And every so often, when she looked at them, she'd think of how close she had come to losing everything, not just her home, but her peace, her dignity, her sense of self. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted everything in soft gold, Melissa sat beside her on the bench. "You know," she began, "I used to think power was about control, about being the loudest voice in the room. But now I see it's about knowing when to be quiet, when to listen." Eleanor smiled. "And when to forgive." Melissa looked at her. "You forgave me before I even asked, didn't you?" Eleanor's eyes softened. "That's what mothers do, dear, even when they've been told to cook or starve." They both laughed softly, the kind of laugh that comes not from humor, but from healing. As evening settled in, Eleanor felt an overwhelming peace, the kind that doesn't come from winning, but from letting go. She realized that revenge hadn't been in the locks, or the confrontation, or even in Melissa's apology. The real revenge had been quiet, living well, loving calmly, and teaching through strength rather than resentment. Before heading home, she looked at the golden cup in her hands one last time, its cracks gleaming in the fading light. "Life breaks all of us," she whispered, "but if we're lucky, it also gives us gold to mend the pieces." And with that, she smiled, knowing that her story, their story, was no longer one of bitterness or blame, but of rebirth. Because sometimes, when life tells you to cook or starve, you learn to serve something much greater. A lifetime of regret turned into a recipe for peace.